are very honored and excited for today's summit to have a conversation with a true icon and inspiring leader in the independent school world, Pat Bassett. Pat, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Always fun for me to be engaged in these kinds of conversations.
We really appreciate. I saying earlier that you truly need no introduction, but just I'll share that you're a Phi Beta Kappa magna cum laude graduate of Williams College, where he is captain of the lacrosse team. He holds a master's degree in film studies from Northwestern University. He and his wife Barbara have 2 grown daughters and 2 grandchildren who live in Boulder, Colorado. And his passions are cinema critiquing, and if we had more time today, we'd have to get some tips from you for what to view this year, and golf. And with golf, Pat says himself that sadly he has a flat learning curve. I love that. Now Pat officially and fully retired in 2019, so we're very grateful, Pat, again for your sharing your wisdom and insight today. He's served over the course of 5 decades in the independent school industry as a head of school, was longtime president of the National Association of Independent Schools, and co-founder and president of Heads Up Educational Consulting, an educational consulting firm. He's a past trustee of his alma mater, Williams College, and currently sits on the boards of Woodbury Forest School, 3W, Grab the Torch, United Educators, all of these organizations serving the independent school industry. You'll soon realize that Pat has a great wit and great humor, and I love. I think that it says a lot about Pat, who you are on your signature for emails. Number one is the closing carpe diem, which is so appropriate and something we actually have in our conference room, a big poster. And then 2 quotes, and if you don't mind, I'm going to share them. I love these. Good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from bad judgment, Mark Twain. And then when the horse dies, dismount, an English proverb. So just appreciate your wisdom and your leadership over the years and your friendship and willing to share with us today.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to do so. Those quotations pretty much sum up what leaders have to pay attention to.
Amen. And I'm keeping those. So thank you. Yeah. Well, Pat, just for our conversation, many independent schools have seen an increased enrollment, during the pandemic, and some have cited the advantage of, independent school decision making, that local, autonomy, and the ability of schools to return to in-person learning. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the pandemic's impact on independent school enrollment.
It's actually had a positive impact because there's many examples of public schools closing throughout the country and independent schools finding a way to stay open. Sometimes it's fully vaccinated kids and staff in classrooms in person. Other times it's a kind of hybrid. Those that haven't been vaccinated get remote learning simultaneous with the in-person learning in the classroom. So it's one of the great strengths of independent schools is their flexibility and adaptability, because they are set up and their DNA is driven by the need to deliver great learning and education, support, character development, all those incredibly important elements of what happens in a great independent school. So far so good, I think. I think we'll actually end up securing school by school eternal gratitude from parents whose neighbors' kids are out of public school, not being educated, getting sick. So we have a huge leverage in our autonomy to do what we think is practical and right and safe.
Awesome. And Pat, do you think this the enrollment bump, the impact from the pandemic will be lasting for independent schools?
I do, because once you get a taste of it, once you see how personal and empathetic school personnel is to their children, once you compare, a class of 35 or 40 to a class of 14, all these elements really ring home as something we're sacrificing to. So we're confident about the future of independent schools because parents are willing to get the best possible education for their kids.
And Pat, when you think of the pandemic, is there an example or two that you could share of an independent school that you think did particularly well?
Yes. The school I'm closest to is Woodbury Forest School, all boys boarding in Virginia. And Byron Halsey, the head of that school, very, very practical, visionary, but committed to in-school learning. So we've been doing it straight through the pandemic, and we'll do so forever. We're taking the necessary precautions, keeping kids and faculty and staff masked, abiding by social distancing, all the things that we do when we go to the grocery store. The schools manage to find a way to do in educating kids.
And Pat, there certainly was an economic impact with the pandemic, but
Right.
do you see how do you see independent schools responding to, say, the next economic occasion of recession? What might happen? Are we
Well, they'll
ready?
learn a lot from what's happening here. It's a good idea to have lots of money in reserve because schools are taking a hit. Parents sometimes lose their jobs, can't afford tuition. Schools are trying to accommodate them for a period of time until their job and their income comes back. So there's this loyalty, school to parent, parent to school, that over time will be rewarded for both families and for schools.
And Pat, what is the most significant change that you have seen in the independent school world over your incredible career?
So I guess the most important change is the development of emotional intelligence in the DNA of independent schools. In the good old days with tyrannical heads of school, the school head would lay down the law. There was no exception to it. There was no interchange, no democracy in schools. All of that's changed with a much more involved, active faculty, staff, student body. And that's a good thing, so that the staff in our schools feel empowered as employees. Now, the advantage of the way we hire and whom we hire is that we don't just look for academic credibility, the pedigree of where you went to prep school and which Ivy League school you attended and which other prestigious prep schools you came to before you came to our school, that sort of thing. But it's paid off by the fact that we end up hiring really, really smart teachers who are what we call the triple threat. You can't just come and teach Latin at our schools. You have to teach Latin and be a coach. Could be the coach of the basketball team, or it could be the coach of the chess team. But we have, across the board expectations of every minute of your day in life being committed to our schools. And that's what really makes this work for us.
Well, and Pat, what advice would you give to, I know some folks with us today who aspire to be a head of school or might be
Right.
looking to their next move as a head of school. What advice would you give to someone who wants to position themselves for success as a head of school?
Well, my immediate response was to say, run for the hills, because this is one hell of a job. But beyond that facetious remark, it is the best job in the world. If you have the capacity to lead faculty, staff, kids, alumni, parents, and you relish it, and you are thick-skinned enough to take the slings and arrows that inevitably appear on a day-to-day basis, then you might just have the character and strength and experience to be an effective school head. I would definitely recommend sort of the second tier of our leadership in our schools, the division heads, the deans who aspire to be heads, to make sure you have a mentor relationship with either your head or maybe the head of a school you attended, because all first-time heads need someone with experience and wisdom to give them counsel when the tough times emerge. So seek that out as you become a first-time head.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Pat, it's interesting to watch parents evolve, and I know you've seen a lot of generations and changes with the generation of parents that independent schools have today. Are there particular skills that you feel that heads of school need to have to be successful in dealing with these parents?
Well, that is the key challenge. Um, a generation or two ago, the parents had like no say. If the parents objected to have their child having this teacher, then the head would make sure that child had the teacher for 4 years, right? So the sort of the autocratic nature of headship evolved over time. So to their credit, our school heads have become much more diplomatic, much more participatory, allowing much more participation in decision making, especially about one's own child. But without caving in, without giving parent total autonomy in deciding the best path at our school for your child. So I think our heads have sort of gotten beyond that stage of feeling necessary to sort of bow to each parental demand. And the fact that our schools produce such incredibly good results, that's the real ticket for success at schools, and for the authority of the head of school to be recognized and adhered to. So, if you look at the data, the kids who go to our prep schools end up going successfully to very competitive colleges, having successful careers. They end up being loyal and generous contributors as alumni. Woodbury Forest School is where I started, and I've had years on the board there. And they do an annual, every 5-year sequence of alumni surveys, and they're really startlingly positive, because the kids, a place like Woodbury is like many of our schools. It's not only the academic and the sports that influence the growth of these young people, but it's the character development, the moral development. And being so close to Woodbury, I started there as a teacher in 1970 for a decade. And that honor code is rock solid. You could drop $100 bill on the sidewalk and no one would touch it. And you would never, I mean, the freshmen, you would never lie at Woodbury Forest School. There's no second chance for lying, cheating, or stealing. So when you have a rock solid, unequivocal set of values, like many or most, maybe even all of our schools, that means a lot. The academics are important. The transition to the next level of schooling counts when people are assessing the effectiveness of your school. All that's important. But the end result of strong relationships with faculty and staff and advisors, a strong character code that actually counts and people enforce, terrific academics that give kids a real head up when they leave school and go to college. All of this combines to make our schools extremely valuable.
Great, thank you. Pat, we've seen, and I know you have a small number of schools looking past, educators when they do a head search, and bringing in maybe an attorney, someone from business, sometimes a board member. Do you think that is isolated, or is that a potential trend in schools?
I think the jury's out a little bit on that. It's still fairly unusual for that to happen. It happens when a business board thinks a businessman, a lawyer, attorney, whatever, a CEO can shape the school up, right? That's never going to happen that way. The head has to be a product of the educational process, I think. One committed to academic rigor, character development, faculty commitment, all those things that heads inevitably know and do well with. I would say that, the people at the top of their careers in any field tend to have pretty good IQ, high IQ. They're smart. They can sort of see the landscape and see where the potholes are and see where the roads of opportunity to the future are. What's actually more important than IQ is EQ, emotional intelligence. And especially in schools, you have to have a head of school who has that emotional intelligence, EQ, we call it. And a lot of that is aligned with empathy. Emotional intelligence rests on the foundation of empathy. So when my recommendation to heads in their interview with prospective faculty and staff is to tease out what kind of emotional intelligence your candidates have. It's not just enough to have an outstanding academic record at Dartmouth, let's say. I mean, that's a calling card right there. But if you lack emotional intelligence, empathy, sort of connectedness, and when someone walks into your room and you start having a conversation, you can tell if you're connected or not, or if there's any level of emotional intelligence and empathy. So heads are smart about that, and this is why we end up hiring well most of the time.
Great, thank you. Pat, I know on last night there was a clip on the news about what they call, I guess, the Great Resignation and the tight labor market, salaries, wages increasing, people resigning, and then a lot of people just leaving the workforce. Do you see any impact in terms of the workforce for independent schools and maybe heads retiring at this point?
It's hard to call because many jobs are just jobs, and I can find another job if I'm not satisfied with this one. But in independent schools, it's not just a job, it's a calling. Our teachers and staff see themselves as called, just like the priesthood, really, called to do something, to serve the greater good, to share what character and knowledge I have for these young people so they can be, my followers in their own lives and their careers, so they can emulate what good teaching, what good work, what a good employee does.
Great. Thank you. And was just curious about the, with increased enrollments, and you mentioned it, the need for reserves, because a lot are giving away more and more in financial assistance, aid, however they call it. And according to NAIS, the average tuition at an independent school is $26,000, and when you factor in parochial schools, I think it lowers to about 11. But those stats also show about 1 out of 4 families are receiving assistance. Do you think those levels of tuition and also even the financial aid are sustainable? What's the future there for the financial model?
I do believe it's sustainable because it's the upper 5% of income families are the ones that are full pay, and they can afford it at their income levels. The advantage of our schools is that we're also good at fundraising, especially with our alumni. So when we build endowment, our endowment manages to fund our financial aid, and we can make our schools more accessible. Endowment, by the way, we've gotten very sophisticated at raising endowment. The onset of CRUTs, charitable remainder unit trusts, incredibly important. I mean, people, including us, our family, put a ton of money into them because, at Williams College, I get a 6% return.
Wow.
On my charitable remainder unit trust. At Woodbury, I get 6.5% return. So you can't get that return on anything anywhere, right? Plus, you get the charitable deduction. So what's not to like?
Yeah. That's awesome, and it kind of dovetails to kind of what do you see independent schools doing? Is it a focus on endowment in terms of funding the financial assistance? What do you see happening that's successful?
People who have the capacity to donate generously and make a difference are sophisticated enough to know what any individual school really needs it for, right? So any kind of endowment trust that they establish to the tune of several $100,000, let's say, They get a huge tax break, but also they end up making a significant impact on the direction of the school, its capacity to educate to its fullest. So I say it's a virtuous cycle, actually.
I
You
love
could
it.
invest your money in gasoline stocks or whatever, or you can invest your money in schools, and you might end up with a better return in schools.
I love it. And I love that term, virtuous cycle. That's awesome. Well, Pat, we're so grateful for your wisdom. And today we've got with us some heads of schools, some chief financial officers, chief development officers, and other leaders. Any closing thoughts or comments or charge to this group?
Sure. The group you just mentioned is the equivalent of a Boy Scout troop in the sense that, we have Boy Scouts around our table. They're virtuous young people. They raise their fingers and give the pledge. They're rooted in sacred values of honesty and clarity and pointed willingness to work with others and empathize with others. So, I have total confidence in the future of our leadership in our schools, in the current and future leaders, because they grow up in a culture that values emotional intelligence, academic intelligence, empathy, service, all of which they could thrive in any other industry. But we're fortunate to have them in our industry. And the draw is helping shape the lives of young people towards a virtuous future.
Pat, I love it. Thank you so much. And we are grateful for your insight. And I'm so grateful that although you say you're fully retired, you're still willing to give the benefit of your incredible experience and wisdom. So on behalf of everybody with us today and all who might see this, a big thank you, and look forward hopefully to seeing you in 2022.
Hope you come by Washington and buy me dinner at the very least.
I'm looking forward to it. I owe you more than that, but I look forward to it, my friend.
Sounds good, Jeff.
Hey,
Take care.
thank
Good
you so
luck.
much. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.